Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a rare but really serious neurological condition called progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. We'll just call it PML. It's a fascinating and kind of scary situation where a virus that most of us have and is totally harmless can turn into a major threat. So we're going to break down exactly how that happens.
So let's start with a question that gets right to the heart of it all. What if a virus that most of us are carrying around right now, completely harmlessly, could just wake up and become a devastating threat to our health? I know, it sounds like something out of a movie, but this is the central mystery of PML. Well, it all comes down to a tiny thing called the JC virus. And what's wild is just how common this virus is. I mean, look at this. Somewhere between 50 and 70% of all adults have it. For almost every single one of us, it does absolutely nothing. It just stays dormant our whole lives and we never even know it's there. So, here's how we're going to break it all down today. First, we'll look at the virus itself. Then, we'll see what happens when our body's defenses, our immune system, fail. We'll define what PML actually is, figure out how it's diagnosed, explore how you fight it, and finally, talk about what life looks like for patients afterward.
All right, let's kick things off with the virus itself. Really, the best way to think about the JC virus is as this super common and almost always harmless little passenger that we all pick up at some point. You see, once you have it, the JC virus basically goes to sleep. It enters this inactive state. And in anyone with a healthy immune system, it stays asleep forever. It's a lifelong, quiet infection that causes zero problems. And that's the key takeaway here. The virus itself isn't the real villain of this story.
So, if the virus isn't the villain, what is? Well, that brings us to part 2, when the shield fails. This is where the story takes a really critical turn, and it's all about the strength of our immune system.
This really gets to the core of what causes PML. The disease doesn't happen just because the JC virus is there. It happens because the immune system fails to keep that virus locked down. Think of your immune system like a security guard. As long as that guard is on duty, the virus stays in its cell. PML is what happens when the guard walks off the job.
So here's how it all goes down, step by step. First, something has to seriously weaken the immune system. This gives that sleeping JC virus the perfect opportunity to wake up. As it reactivates, it can actually mutate, and these new versions start traveling to the brain and infecting brain cells. And that final step, the damage in the brain, that is PML.
So who's at risk for this? It's usually people with very specific medical situations. We're talking about people with blood cancers, like lymphoma, transplant patients who have to take drugs to suppress their immune system, and people with autoimmune disorders like MS who are on certain powerful medications. Individuals with HIV or other rare immune problems are also at higher risk. Now that we know how it happens, let's get a proper definition. In part 3, we're asking, what exactly is PML? At its core, it's an infection that goes straight for the central nervous system.
The name actually tells you the whole story. Progressive means it gets worse over time. Multifocal because it causes multiple spots of damage in the brain. And leukoencephalopathy. I know, it's a mouthful. That just means it's a disease that affects the brain's white matter. And it's all because that JC virus woke up.
So what is this virus actually doing inside the brain? It causes something called demyelination. The virus attacks the very cells that create myelin, which is this protective fatty coating around all our nerve fibers. The best analogy is the plastic insulation on an electrical wire. If you strip that insulation off, the wire short circuits. That's exactly what's happening to the nerve signals in the brain. And the results of all that short-circuiting? Well, they're devastating. Since the damage can pop up anywhere in the brain, the symptoms are all over the place. It can be anything from clumsiness and vision problems to huge personality changes, memory loss, or even losing the ability to speak. And these things don't just happen overnight. They creep in slowly over several weeks.
Okay, so this brings us to a huge challenge in part 4, the path to diagnosis. Just figuring out that a patient has PML can be incredibly difficult because it's so rare and its symptoms look like a lot of other things.
And this is such a critical point. Because PML isn't common, a doctor might not think of it right away. This is why awareness is so important for catching it early. A doctor has to connect the dots between the patient's weakened immune system and these new, strange neurological symptoms.
The whole diagnostic process is basically detective work. It starts with a deep dive into the patient's medical history and an exam to look for risk factors. Then comes the most important step, an MRI scan, where doctors are looking for that classic damage in the brain's white matter. And finally, to be sure, they do a spinal tap to test the spinal fluid for the JC virus's DNA.
Usually, that combo is enough to get a clear answer.
So, once it's diagnosed, how do you fight PML? That's what we're covering in Part 5, Fighting Back with Immunity. And the strategy here is really unique because you don't actually attack the virus directly.
Now, this is maybe the single most important thing to understand about PML. There is no magic pill, no drug, no injection that can stop the JC virus once it's in the brain. The only effective treatment we have is to fix the original problem, that weakened immune system. The whole game is about restoring the body's natural defenses.
And how you do that totally depends on why the immune system was weak in the first place. For an MS patient, it means stopping the specific drug that's causing the problem. For someone with HIV, it means starting powerful antiretroviral therapy. But each path has a huge challenge. Recovery can be slow, and for some, there's a big risk of a dangerous complication called IRIS. And for people born with a deficient immune system, well, the options are really limited.
And that complication, IRIS, it's this incredibly dangerous paradox. As the immune system roars back to life, it suddenly sees this massive JC virus infection in the brain and launches an all-out war. All that inflammation can actually make the patient's symptoms way worse, sometimes leading to permanent disability or even death if it's not managed carefully.
So what about other ideas, experimental immune therapies? Well, a direct quote from the source material puts it pretty bluntly. While people are definitely looking into these things, right now there's just no solid evidence that they can really change the outcome for PML patients. It's a tough reality, but it's where the science is at the moment.
This brings us to our final and maybe most important section, living with the aftermath. After a diagnosis of PML, what does the future actually look like for a patient? The truth is, the outcomes are all over the map. If the disease isn't managed and the immune system isn't restored, the mortality rate is very high, especially in the first few months. But if you can get the immune system back online, survival is definitely possible. The crucial thing to remember, though, is that even with successful treatment, the damage that was done to the brain is often permanent, leaving many survivors with serious lifelong disabilities.
And this all leaves us with one last big question. We're in an era of incredible medical progress. We have amazing drugs that can tweak and even reboot our immune systems to fight things like cancer and autoimmune diseases. But with that amazing power comes a new kind of risk, the risk of waking up these silent passengers like the JC virus. So the challenge moving forward is pretty clear. As our power to control immunity grows, how do we also grow our wisdom to outsmart the dangers that have been hiding inside us all along?